Donna Beneviento is certainly the most mysterious out of the four lords of Resident Evil Village, and the many ambiguities surrounding her character led to several theories that try to answer some crucial questions regarding her history and the role she plays in the game. Who were her family members and how did they die? What is the story of her sinister-looking doll companion, Angie? What makes her so different to the other lords? And finally, what motivates her? If you've never been to my channel before, welcome! My name is Eerie and I make video essays about different topics while painting something. So if that sounds like something that you would be interested in, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Today I will try to present you with several explanations in regards to the mystery around Donna Beneviento, as well as the symbolism around her and her dolls. So without any further ado, let's paint a character. Donna Beneviento is the last remaining member of the Beneviento family, a respectable family descended from the Berengario, which according to the village folklore was an ancient mutant race who co-founded and ruled over the village and its surrounding lands. The Beneviento house was known as a family of doll makers, while both their name and crest could hint to their Italian origin, as both could lead to a city in southern Italy named Benevento, originally called Beneventum, which means good luck or good event in Latin. This is a bit of a side note, but the town's name was changed from Maleventum, or bad luck, during the Roman period. This area is known for witchcraft during the medieval period in Italy, when sun and moon worship were very common. As mentioned, this could be referred to by the Beneviento crest being the sun and moon. It isn't entirely clear if the profession of doll making ran in the family for generations or whether it was simply the profession of Donna's father. Regardless, Donna is known as a doll maker as well. We know that as a child, Donna was very shy and socially anxious due to a large scar across her face. At some point in her childhood, her whole family dies. We never find out the cause of her family's death, and the possible role Donna might have played in their death is also unclear. We do know that prior to her father's death, he made Donna a doll, which became incredibly special to her. We find out that after Donna's family dies, she withdraws completely. Her emotional and psychological state, which were already presumed to be unstable, deteriorate drastically, and she turns to communicating with others predominantly or even strictly through this doll, which she calls Angie. Not long after this incredible loss, Donna gets adopted by mother Miranda, and it is suggested that Donna was extremely happy with the thought of having a family once more. However, Miranda proves not to be the caring maternal figure Donna possibly hoped for and certainly needed, when we discover that like the other lords, Donna was experimented on by Miranda with a canoe, in search for a proper vessel to bring Miranda's deceased daughter Ava back to life. Like the other lords, Donna is deemed an unfit vessel and instead is bound to serve Miranda in other ways, which remain unclear. This experimentation left Donna with the ability to control the hallucinations induced by inhaling the pollen of plants bred with a mutamycete. We know that the reason for which Donna is deemed an unfit vessel is her extremely unstable mental state, which we can assume continued to worsen after being adopted by Miranda at an extremely fragile place in her life due to the loss of her entire family, a loss she evidently never recovered from due to her still wearing a grieving gown. The breadcrumbs the game leaves about Donna and her tragic history leave several crucial questions which, unsurprisingly, led to many fascinating theories that try to connect the dots and gain further understanding and explanation in regards to this enthralling character and her extremely creepy doll companion Angie. In this video, we will be referring to these questions and discuss some of these theories to try and build a hypothesis on Donna's role in Resident Evil Village and what motivates her as a character in the game. Who were Donna's family members and how did they die? This is something the game never exposes, as the only member of Donna's family who we are given any solid information on is Donna's father, and that information being her father making her the doll Angie as a gift sometime before his death. We know nothing of Donna's mother, and we are never explicitly told if Donna had any siblings, but the game does give us hints about one individual who might have belonged to House Beneviento and another who certainly did, but her relation to Donna is never disclosed. The first individual was named Bernadette B, or Subject 177. Whose name we only come across once as we find notes documenting a few of Miranda's Cadu experiments, which also include Lady D. One of the notes describes Subject 177, Bernadette B, 21, female, result, death. The B is thought to stand for Beneviento. Some claim that in the Japanese version of the game we are given more information about Bernadette as well as Donna's parents. That information being that Bernadette was Donna's sister, who Miranda experimented on and ended up killing in the 50s. This death was devastating to Donna and Bernadette's parents, and they end up taking their own lives. A few articles state this as fact with some mild changes. For example, some articles don't state Bernadette was necessarily necessarily Donna's sister, and the year of her being experimented on isn't always claimed to be in the 50s. There really isn't anything to confirm this that I could find, and moreover, it seems unlikely that if the experiment on Bernadette was conducted in the 50s that she would be Donna's sister, because we don't know that Donna shares Mother Miranda's and Lady D's powers of an unnaturally long life, and we can assume that her age matches her appearance, implying that she's likely in her 30s or so, meaning that she would have been born in the late 80s, early 90s. Bernadette was 21 when she was experimented on, so if the experiment did indeed take place in the 1950s, she would have been born in the late 20s or early 30s, and was probably old enough to be Donna's grandmother. Aside from a couple of articles and Reddit threads claiming this to be mentioned in the Japanese version, I genuinely couldn't find anything to confirm this, and I don't know for sure that there even is a difference between the Japanese and English versions, aside from the Japanese being lightly censored, so take this with a grain of salt. But if you've played the Japanese version, please feel free to confirm or deny this theory by leaving a comment. The other member in the Beneviento family that is mentioned in the game is Claudia Benaviento. On the path to the Beneviento manor, we come across a well-kept grave decorated with flowers, dolls, and other small tombstones. When we first come across this grave, we don't know the full name of who it belongs to, as half of the inscription is missing. All we can see is that the first name ends with an A, that the last name is Beneviento, and that whoever was buried there died when they were 9 years old. By finding the missing part of the panel, we see that the name of the buried child was Claudia. While the game doesn't tell us who Claudia was, it is largely theorized that Claudia was Donna's sister, due to her birth year more or less matching to how Donna herself seems to be, as well as how the grave looks like it is often visited and the flowers on and around it well kept. More theories in regards to Claudia being Donna's sister pertain to Donna's doll companion Angie, and we will discuss them shortly. But before we do, let's talk about the theory surrounding Donna's parents' death. As mentioned before, one theory claims that they ended their own lives. Another theory suggests their death might have been caused by Donna herself. The theory is that Donna might have caused her parents to hallucinate with her powers, and these hallucinations somehow led to their death. It is suggested that this could have happened before Donna knew how to control her power over others' hallucinations, and their deaths were a devastating accident. The guilt Donna felt due to this accident led her mental illness to worsen substantially and drive her to complete madness, as well as live the rest of her life wearing the grieving garb. While this is an interesting theory, I don't believe it to be true, as it is assumed that Donna was only injected with a Cadu after Miranda adopted her when she was already an orphan, so unless Miranda began experimenting with Donna when her parents were still alive, this theory isn't really valid, but a very interesting one nonetheless. The many mysteries surrounding Angie. We know that Angie was made for Donna by her father, who possibly created Angie in his daughter's likeness, decorated her face with a scar that both resembles Donna's scar that made her ashamed of her face and scared of interacting with other people, as well as divides Angie's face into the sun and moon symbol of House Beneviento. However, Angie's appearance arises many fascinating questions, most of which are not explicitly explained in the game. The most important question is, what is Angie made of? When Ethan sells Angie to the Duke says,
"Ah, Miss Angie. Just adorable. Porcelain dolls are very popular, you know."
Yet Angie doesn't look like she's made of porcelain at all. The rest of the dolls in the Beneviento estate do look like porcelain dolls, but Angie looks nothing like them, so what is she made of? One theory is that Angie is made of Donna's presumably sister Claudia's bones. Looking at Angie's limbs, we can certainly see that they are made from several bone-looking pieces linked by chains. If she is indeed made with Claudia's bones, this would mean that the skeleton in Claudia's grave isn't Claudia, which very well could be, as when the Beneviento treasure is taken from Claudia's grave, we see that the skeleton is strangely positioned, as if it's been moved or tampered with, but most noticeably, that the skeleton is naked. We can imagine that Claudia was buried in a different position, and certainly that she wasn't buried without any clothes, meaning that at the very least her grave had been reopened after her burial. Some have also claimed that the skeleton seems to be too big for a 9-year-old, which in fairness I don't know if I agree with, because we have no way to know the exact proportions of the grave, but we do see that the skeleton is small compared to the stone coffin it lays in. It may be that the remains we find in Claudia's grave are indeed Claudia, but that someone took her clothes and some of her bones, which is possible as half of the skeleton isn't visible. Another interesting question in regards to Angie is her gown. Angie is wearing a wedding gown, which could be another hint that she is either made from Claudia's remains or at least meant to represent Claudia for Donna. Romania, as well as other Eastern European countries, have the tradition of burying unwed girls girls and women in wedding gowns. Since Claudia died a child and the skeleton we find in her grave is bare, this could mean that she was buried in the wedding gown worn by Angie. The moon and sun crest Angie's face is decorated with, as well as her dress, could hint to another theory that I find fascinating, and that theory is that Donna and Claudia could have been twins. This theory suggests that both girls had opposing personalities, and that while Donna is explicitly described as an introvert in the game, Claudia could have been extroverted. Perhaps Claudia was the one in control and she would speak for her reserved and insecure twin Donna. If this is true, Angie very well could be a physical and characteristic representation of Claudia, which would explain why Donna only speaks to others through Angie and why Angie is so loud and energetic compared to her owner. In this theory, the moon and sun crest are a representation of the opposing characters of the twins. The duality of their personalities might have also been represented by their clothes. Angie's white wedding gown would normally represent life, companionship, and joy, compared to Donna's black gown, which represents death, loss, and grief. This leads to another disturbing question, which is that if Angie is indeed made out of Claudia's bones and dressed in Claudia's burial gown, why the hell would Donna's father make his daughter such a horrific doll? I haven't found any interesting theories that can explain this, but I have my own theory, which is that the Angie Donna's father made isn't the same Angie that we meet in the game. Perhaps in the state of delirium Donna found herself after losing her whole family, she robbed Claudia's grave, took her father's doll apart, and put it back together, mixing her father's original design with her own twisted one. The final question that concerns Angie is whether she actually is alive thanks to Donna implanting her doll with a kadu, or whether Angie speaking and moving are just a hallucination. We will get back to this question a little bit later, and before that, let's move on to the question surrounding Donna and her dissimilarities from the other three lords. Donna's similarities with the lords are quite conspicuous. They are all referred to by Miranda as her children. Their families are assumed to all be descendants of the ruling families of the village, and they were all experimented on by Miranda in her quest to find a human vessel to resurrect Ava, and are consequently injected with the mutamycete and are given the kadu. But this is pretty much where the similarities end. On closer inspection, we come to a conclusion that Donna is the exception to the other lords in several ways. Firstly, we never discover how Donna feels about Mother Miranda. We learn that Lady D and Moreau think of Miranda as a mother. They fight for her attention and validation, and they want to obey and please her.
Yes, of course, I understand the importance of the ceremony. I won't let you down.
And that Heisenberg absolutely hates and resents Miranda and has been secretly planning to destroy her.
Don't you get it? It's a test. To see if you're strong enough to be a part of Miranda's family.
I don't want to be a part of Miranda's family.
Neither did I, but here we are! You and me, Ethan. Together, we can go save Rose, and we can use her to grind Miranda into paste.
Most importantly, we learn about their feelings for Miranda from their own mouths or personal notes. The only time Donna's feelings towards Miranda are presented to Ethan is in the Beneviento gardener's diary, where he wrote that Donna is happy to be adopted by Miranda. But we have to take into consideration that this might not be true as she grew older with Miranda experimenting on her, and we have no way to know what her feelings are now. The second difference is that Donna is the only lord that doesn't transform when fighting Ethan, and also that she is the only lord who is introduced to a crystallized treasure when they die. I really can't think of a reason for that, nor have I found a theory that explains it, so if you have any thoughts, please let me know because it's been kind of driving me crazy. The final difference we will discuss is one that I believe to be very important when we try to understand Donna's motivations, and that is her relationship with the other village members and the kadu. Donna is the only one out of Miranda's family who doesn't seem to use the kadu to create an army, whether purposefully or as a byproduct of an experimentation, as the other lords do and Miranda does herself. As each lord is battled and defeated in different segments of the game, we come across a specific kind of creature which, as we raffle through documents and pictures, we understand to be created by the lords by infecting villagers and other individuals with kadu parasite. Lady D segment has the Maraikas, which we learn to be the girls from the village who fell victim to Lady D and her 3 daughters. Salvatore Moreau segment reveals that the more animalistic wolf creatures are a result of his experimentations with the kadu with the aims of finding a vessel for Miranda, and Heisenberg's segment shows the steampunk machine zombies in his factory, which we learn are created by him with the aims of building an army to defeat Miranda. Donna Beneviento's segment has no such herd of creatures that attack Ethan as he roams about the village or her own property. Instead, we discover she had divided her Kadu among her dolls, which hints to her not wanting to use the Kadu to infect, experiment on, and use the villagers for her own gain. In fact, it is never explicitly stated that Donna ever killed anyone, aside from the Duke saying that none of her playmates that traveled to her manor ever came out.
None of her playmates have ever come back from that dank old estate.
Now, this certainly could mean that they all died and that she likely did cause her death, but one should wonder why we never see proof that she did. We know for a fact that the other lords killed many people, and we even get to see so for ourselves. We see many body parts in Lady D's cellar, and we learn that her victims are delivered to the mansion to have their blood drained for her traditional wine, and their flesh eaten by her daughters. We know that Moreau documents the experiments he does on villagers, and that many of them die. And we learn that Heisenberg experiments on a massive amount of bodies in his factory, but we also know that he finds death games extremely entertaining and that he likely orchestrated a few. No bodies or body parts are found in the Beneviento manor, and so what happens to the visitors she lures in is left to the imagination, and one should certainly wonder why. So the theory that Donna never actually wanted to kill anyone is supported by several things. The first that we will discuss is her interaction with Ethan. The horror that Donna inflicts on Ethan is psychological, as she makes him hallucinate genuinely terrifying things, but at no point in her segment is Ethan in any real danger. Before the first game begins, Ethan is cleaned from his inventory by Angie, who disappears shortly after.
What? Wait, where's my gun?
This is to say that he won't be defeating himself against a physical danger. Instead, the scavenging game is a psychological horror for Ethan as well as for the player. The fetus monster that appears at the end of the scavenging game is almost definitely a hallucination as well, as all traces of it disappear once Ethan kills Donna. As a matter of fact, this creature isn't meant to be battled because it can't be defeated, but it's meant to be avoided altogether. While Ethan does die if he fails to escape the creature, it had been suggested that he doesn't actually die but simply passes out due to the tremendous fear that he feels when he hallucinates being eaten by this extremely disturbing monstrosity that represents Ethan's aborted child. The fact that this is what the monster represents is reason enough to believe that it is a hallucination, since we know that Mia gave birth to a healthy baby Rose, and not ripped apart by her own fetus as the hallucinations of Mia's voice imply. We do need to consider though the option that Donna's wish is to play with her food before eating it, and that the only reason Ethan isn't fatally attacked by Donna at any point in the game is because she wanted to have fun tormenting and scaring him before doing so, but he beat her to the punch. Moreover, Angie does threaten Ethan's life during the hide-and-seek game by saying that her friends will murder him if he doesn't find her, and then again right before she goes to hide by saying, "Tick-tock, your life is on the line."
You're still alive, huh? You better find me a clue before my friends murder you! Tick-tock, your life is on the line. Wait!
Despite all of this, it is still peculiar that Donna doesn't take advantage of him being in a compromised state due to hallucinating and with nothing but scissors to defend himself, even after Ethan makes the first strike. Donna could have cut the game short and just be done with it to prevent her doll from being destroyed, but she didn't. Another hint to the theory that Donna doesn't actually wish to kill Ethan is that while the other dolls do attack Ethan during the hide-and-seek game, they stop on their own before doing any real damage, and neither Donna or Angie try to fatally injure or kill him at any point in the game. Instead, it is Ethan who hunts and continuously stabs Angie. This leads me to our next and possibly most interesting mystery related to Donna's character. If she isn't primarily motivated by killing, what could she possibly be motivated by? From the very beginning of the Beneviento segment, Donna's loneliness is heavily implied. First by the Duke, who mentioned that none of the playmates who entered the Beneviento household ever returned, then by Ethan's hallucinations of Mia, which we later discover is induced by the yellow plant around Claudia's grave.
Ethan, come with me. There's something I have to tell you.
Mia?
What Mia's image says in Ethan's trip is therefore Donna's own words to Ethan, and so it hints to how Donna feels about what had been done to Rose.
Rose feels different. Ethan, you have to fix her.
As well as Donna's own state of mind.
Everyone leaves me. Even Rose. I don't want to be alone.
Angie's words to Ethan as the scavenging game begins hint to Donna's true motivations.
For so long. I'd make a much better daughter than Rose. Please, won't you stay with me forever?
What?
But what I think could also be a hidden meaning is in Angie's statement that she will be a better daughter than Rose. Donna is aware of Ethan's loss, and she either offers him the same substitute as she used to cope with her loss, and that substitute is Angie, or she is speaking for herself due to her desperation of having someone to truly care for her. If this interpretation is true, it hints to the fact that Donna is empathetic to others' tragic losses due to her suffering a tremendous loss as well. This could further be supported by the note that we find of the Beneviento gardener, which said he was invited by Donna to her manor so that he could see his deceased wife once again. Of course, this could be a trap to lure him in and torture him, but we could also take it to mean that Donna was genuinely happy to help another person cope with losing a loved one with her powers of manipulating their hallucinations. Another thing that supports this theory is that the only words Donna ever says herself in the game without using hallucinations or Angie are told to Ethan before the hide-and-seek game. Perhaps she wished that those that she invites will decide to stay willingly. However, her immense fear of abandonment and mental state led her to make them stay forcefully when they inevitably wanted to leave. Perhaps the most prominent clue that Donna is motivated by loneliness is that she used the Kadu to bring her dolls to life, and that is likely to keep her company rather to be used as a weapon. The final question we need to ask then is whether Angie and Donna's dolls actually do come to life thanks to the Kadu, or is it just a hallucination? On the one hand, we know Angie is implanted with the Kadu, which means that she is used as a vessel for a living organism and could definitely be alive. However, the hide-and-seek game hints to all of Ethan's interactions with Angie to actually be interactions with Donna. After the first time Ethan finds Angie and stabs her with the scissors, he draws blood, which already gives us a clue that he might not be stabbing Angie at all.
Monster.
We then see that bloody human handprints and smears appear on different walls of the house when they weren't there before and certainly don't look like they were left by Angie. The third and final time Ethan finds and stabs Angie, the body of Donna appears, while Angie has no blood on her, revealing that Ethan had been stabbing Donna all along. We can assume that Miranda's notes on Donna were inaccurate and that Miranda didn't actually understand Donna's motivations either. We find that Miranda's notes state that Donna used the Kadu on her dolls to control them from a distance, but we find that Donna never does control them from a distance by the fact that she was the one stabbed instead of Angie, since it was her speaking for Angie all along, and the only reason Ethan saw Angie speak or move when Donna wasn't there was because he was hallucinating. The same could be inferred when it comes to the other dolls. Ethan might have hallucinated them moving and even attacking him. Donna Beneviento is, in my opinion, the most fascinating character in the entire game, and the ambiguity around her was extremely well crafted. It gave the game the additional value of hunting for clues to solve the mystery that is Donna and introduce a segment that is dedicated to psychological horror among the monster hunting the rest of the game offers. Whether any of the theories are true isn't entirely relevant, because the thrill of following breadcrumbs even after finishing the actual gameplay adds another dimension to the story. Is Donna a demented murderer that turns her victims to dolls, or is she another victim of Mother Miranda that was driven mad by constantly being abandoned and never actually cared for? Is she motivated by bloodthirst or by debilitating loneliness? Are her dolls actually alive, or is it all a hallucination she inflicts on everyone around her to fool them, including Mother Miranda and the other lords? Is this the real life, or is this just fantasy? We will probably never know, but we can say for certain that there is a lot of beauty in the mystery. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I really hope that you found the topic interesting, and I also hope that you enjoyed the painting process of this piece. I hope it's focusing on it. Let me know what you thought about the theories that we presented today, and if you have your own theories or theories that I haven't mentioned, please let me know in the comment section down below. I enjoyed making this video so much. I really enjoyed drowning in the research, and I loved painting this piece. So I really hope that you enjoyed it as well. Like this video if you did, dislike the video if you didn't. Consider subscribing to my channel if you enjoy this type of content. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.